7:14 a.m., January 9th, 2026. Katy, Texas. A school nurse named Sandra Okafor walked into Examination Room B at Westfield Elementary and found 4 children sitting in a row on the padded bench. They had been sent from 3 different classrooms. The teacher who flagged them had noticed they were moving stiffly. She assumed it was the cold. Sandra did not assume anything. She started with the oldest, a girl, 11 years old, last name listed in the system as Brower. Sandra asked her to raise her arms. The girl complied without expression. On the upper left arm, running parallel to the humerus, there were 2 thin linear bruises, pale yellow at the edges, several days old. Sandra moved to the next child. Same arm, same position, same pattern. By the time she reached the 4th child, a boy, 8 years old, Sandra had already reached for her notepad. The 4 children shared a last name. They had been enrolled at Westfield Elementary for 11 weeks. In those 11 weeks, they had appeared on campus a total of 19 times. Estimated monthly contributions from their family, $3,800. Sandra had seen that bruise pattern once before, not in a clinic. In a training seminar on institutional abuse she had attended 4 years earlier through the Harris County Health Department. The presenter, a forensic pediatrician, had described linear patterned bruising as a marker of repeated, methodical physical discipline, not the chaotic bruising of accidental injury. Methodical, repeated, patterned. Sandra picked up the phone and called CPS. What happened next would not play out the way most mandatory reports do. Most mandatory reports generate a caseworker visit, a home check, documentation, a follow-up scheduled for 3 weeks out. This one moved differently because of one line in Sandra Okafor's written report. One line she included almost as an afterthought. She wrote, "Home address listed as a faith-based therapeutic retreat registered as a Texas nonprofit." That line changed everything. The CPS intake coordinator who received the report flagged it within 4 hours. The listed home address, 14 Crossroads Farm Road, Katy, Texas, did not appear in any residential zoning database. It appeared in the Texas Secretary of State's nonprofit registry under the name New Covenant Restoration Ministries. The organization's stated purpose: residential faith-based therapeutic services for families in spiritual transition. The intake coordinator forwarded the case to her supervisor. Her supervisor forwarded it to the FBI's Houston Field Office, Crimes Against Children Unit. By 4:30 p.m. on January 9th, 2026, Special Agent Daniel Cruz had the file open on his desk. Cruz had been with the Cassie unit for 6 years. He had worked trafficking cases, exploitation cases, interstate abduction cases. He had learned early that the most dangerous situations for children were rarely the ones that looked dangerous from the outside. The most dangerous situations were the ones that looked organized, structured, sanctioned by something that resembled authority. New Covenant Restoration Ministries looked, on paper, like a functioning institution. It had a Texas nonprofit charter, filed in March 2021. It had a listed director, Reverend Gerald Marsh, self-described as a pastoral counselor and family restoration specialist. It had a physical address, a mailing address, and a registered agent. What it did not have was a Form 990 on file with the IRS. It had never filed one. Not for 2021, not for 2022, not for 2023, not for 2024. For a nonprofit receiving revenue, that silence is not an administrative oversight. It is a choice. Cruz ran the address through the Texas DPS database. No prior calls, no prior investigations, no prior CPS flags from this specific address. Though there had been a complaint filed 18 months earlier from a neighboring property owner about unusual activity and limited visibility into the compound due to new fencing. The complaint had been marked resolved. No follow-up. He pulled the nonprofit charter. New Covenant Restoration Ministries listed a board of directors with 3 names. Gerald Marsh, a woman named Patricia Foss, listed as administrative director, and a man named Thomas Vale, listed as program coordinator. None of the 3 held any licensed credentials in Texas. Not in counseling, not in education, not in child welfare. The charter described the facility as a residential, educational, and spiritual formation program for children and families. 9 children. That was the number Sandra Okafor's report estimated, based on what the Brower children had told her. 9 children total on the property. 9 children. None of them appearing in any Texas public school enrollment system. Cruz spent the next 72 hours building a picture. He pulled property records. The land at 14 Crossroads Farm Road was 3 acres, purchased in 2020 by a holding entity called Restoration Land Trust, LLC. The LLC's registered agent was Gerald Marsh. The property had been assessed for agricultural use until 2021, when Marsh applied for and received a variance to operate a residential care facility. The variance had been approved by Harris County's zoning board. The application listed maximum occupancy at 12 residents. It listed Gerald Marsh as the facility director. It did not require a licensed child care facility permit because New Covenant Restoration Ministries had classified itself as a religious organization under Texas law, a classification that, under state statute, exempted it from certain licensing requirements that would otherwise apply to residential childcare operations. That exemption was not obscure. Most people had never heard of it, but Marsh had. The application language suggested familiarity with the statutory framework. Someone had advised him on how to structure the filing. Cruz requested financial records through a subpoena to the bank listed in the nonprofit's original charter application. The account was held at a regional credit union in Katy. Initial records showed a balance of $214,000 as of January 2026, monthly deposits averaging $22,000 to $28,000. Those deposits came from individual family accounts, wire transfers, ACH payments, all described in the memo field the same way: voluntary family contribution. I spent time going through the transaction logs from that account, and one detail kept pulling at me. The payments were almost perfectly consistent. Month after month, families were sending between $3,600 and $4,200. Not irregular, not variable. Calibrated. The kind of consistency that does not come from voluntary contributions. It comes from billing. Cruz cross-referenced the incoming transfers against Texas state records. He identified 7 families making consistent monthly payments. 7 families who had, at some point, placed children at New Covenant Restoration Ministries. 7 families. 9 children on the property. The math indicated that at least some of those children had been at the facility long enough that their families had stopped communicating with them in any verifiable way. The school enrollment gap was the sharpest signal. In Texas, children between 6 and 18 are required by law to be enrolled in a school, public, private, or a registered homeschool program. None of the 9 children on the property appeared in any of those systems. Marsh had not registered a homeschool program. He had not contracted with any accredited school. The children at New Covenant Restoration Ministries were, in the eyes of the Texas education system, invisible. What surprises me most about this case is not that a man like Gerald Marsh built something like this. It is that 7 families paid him to do it. Parents who believed their children were receiving structured, faith-based education. Parents who were told limited contact was part of the therapeutic process. Parents who sent $3,800 a month and trusted that the receipts they were not receiving meant something official was happening on the other end. By January 16th, 2026, Cruz had a preliminary case. He brought it to the SAC, Special Agent in Charge of the Houston Field Office. The SAC authorized expanded surveillance and requested coordination with Texas DPS and ATF's Financial Investigations Unit. The operation had a name: internal designation only, Operation Crossroads. Surveillance on the 14 Crossroads Farm Road property began January 19th, 2026. 2-person teams in unmarked vehicles, rotating every 6 hours. The property was partially screened by a 6-foot wooden privacy fence along its perimeter road frontage. Long-range optical surveillance captured limited activity. A figure matching Marsh's description moving between what appeared to be a main structure and a secondary outbuilding. A van leaving the property twice per week, returning with grocery store bags visible through the windows. No children visible in the exterior footage. That absence was itself information. Children on a 3-acre property with outdoor space in January should theoretically appear outside, even briefly. The surveillance logs for the first 11 days of Operation Crossroads recorded 0 exterior sightings of minors. Cruz submitted a request for a Title III wire intercept on the facility's landline. The request was denied at the AUSA level. Insufficient predication at that stage. They needed more. On January 24th, an obstacle materialized that Cruz had not anticipated. One of the 7 identified families, the Brower family, whose 4 children Sandra Okafor had originally examined, had apparently been contacted by Marsh directly. He called the father. The conversation lasted 19 minutes. The content was unknown. But 2 days later, the Brower father appeared at the CPS regional office in Katy and submitted a written statement saying his children were enrolled voluntarily and that he wished to withdraw the family from any state investigation. The CPS investigator handling the case forwarded the statement to Cruz immediately. Under Texas law, a parent can, in many circumstances, choose to withdraw cooperation from a CPS investigation. What a parent cannot do is withdraw an FBI investigation that has already been referred through formal channels based on independent law enforcement findings. The Brower father's statement had no legal effect on Operation Crossroads. But it told Cruz something critical. Marsh knew there was scrutiny. He was managing his families. The team had to move faster than originally planned. Cruz requested an emergency meeting with the AUSA assigned to the case. Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Lim, Southern District of Texas. He laid out the financial evidence. $680,000 in documented payments routed through the church operating account over 3 years, with no Form 990 ever filed. The educational invisibility of 9 minors. The pattern of bruising documented by a medical professional. The facility's use of a religious exemption to avoid licensing oversight. And now, evidence of active witness management by the director. Lim agreed. She authorized an application for a search warrant. The warrant application cited 18 U.S.C. Section 2258, Federal Child Abuse Statute, along with wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, based on the payments received under false representations that the program was an accredited educational institution. A federal magistrate judge signed the warrant on February 14, 2026 at 11:22 a.m. But there was a problem. The warrant authorized search of the primary structure and any outbuildings on the property. It did not authorize seizure of the children. It authorized documentation of their condition and referral to CPS for emergency removal if conditions warranted. That distinction mattered legally, and it complicated the operational picture. If agents entered the property and Marsh resisted, or if the children were in a condition that required immediate medical attention, the response framework had to be pre-staged. Cruz coordinated with Harris County Child Protective Services, Harris County Sheriff's Office, and 2 pediatric medical teams from Texas Children's Hospital who agreed to be on standby during the operation. There was a second complication. Texas DPS financial investigators, working independently on the ATF referral, had traced a portion of the $680,000 in facility payments to a secondary account, not the church operating account. A personal account held by Gerald Marsh at a different financial institution. Approximately $94,000 had been moved from the operating account to Marsh's personal account over 18 months in transfers under $10,000, structured to avoid federal reporting thresholds. Structuring, a separate federal violation. And it added Patricia Foss and Thomas Vale to the financial investigation. Both had signature authority on the operating account. AUSA Lim filed an amended warrant application the following week. A second magistrate signed both the original and amended warrants. Operation Crossroads now had authorization to search the property, document financial records on site, and seize electronic devices belonging to all 3 named individuals. Arrest warrants were prepared but not yet executed. The plan: search first, then arrest. The operational briefing for the search was held February 24, 2026, at the Houston field office. Present. Cruz and 4 additional CASC unit agents, 3 Texas DPS officers, 2 ATF financial investigators, and 2 Harris County Sheriff's deputies assigned to the perimeter. The Harris County CPS emergency response team would stage half a mile from the property and enter only after agents had cleared and assessed conditions. The timeline was February 27, 2026, 6 a.m. entry. On February 26th, the night before the search, a surveillance team parked 3 blocks from Crossroads Farm Road confirmed that lights were on in the main structure until approximately 11:40 p.m. Marsh's personal vehicle, a 2019 Ford F-150, dark gray, was parked in the property's internal driveway. Both Fawcett and Vale's vehicles, confirmed by registration, were also on site. All 3 subjects were present. At 5:30 a.m. on February 27, 2026, 8 federal and state officers staged at a predetermined point 0, 4 miles from the property. Put yourself in Daniel Cruz's position for a second. 6 years with the Crimes Against Children unit. Dozens of cases. And yet the moment before an operation like this, where there are children inside, where conditions are unknown, where the subjects have shown willingness to suppress information, that moment carries a specific weight that does not get easier with repetition. The temperature at 5:30 a.m. in Katy, Texas on February 27th was 38 degrees. Clear sky, no wind. The teams were staged in 2 vehicles and a Texas DPS cruiser. At 5:58 a.m., crews gave the signal to move. 6 federal and state vehicles turned onto Crossroads Farm Road. No lights, no sirens. They stopped at the property gate, a standard chain link gate, padlocked. A DPS officer used bolt cutters. The gate swung open. The vehicles moved up the gravel driveway at low speed. The main structure, a converted 2-story farmhouse, had 2 lights on in upper-story windows. Marsh's truck was where surveillance had placed it. At 6:03 a.m., agents reached the front door of the main structure. Crews knocked, announced, "Federal agents, search warrant." Opened the door, 17 seconds of silence. Then the door opened. Gerald Marsh was standing in the doorway in jeans and a flannel shirt. He was 54 years old, 6 feet, heavy build. He looked at the badge crews held up. He looked at the vehicles in his driveway. He said nothing. Crews handed him the warrant. Marsh read it. He stepped aside. The team entered in 2 streams, one to the main floor, one to the upper level. Foss was in the kitchen. Vale was in a back office on the main floor. Both were advised they were subjects of a federal search and directed to remain seated. The upper floor had 4 rooms. 3 of them were sleeping quarters. In those 3 rooms, agents found 9 children. The youngest was 6 years old. The oldest was 14. They were all awake. The entry had woken them. They were dressed. They were sitting on their beds or standing near them. They did not run toward the agents. They stood very still. One of the CAS unit agents, Agent Renee Castillo, who had worked with pediatric victims for 4 years, moved through each room slowly, speaking in a low voice. She asked each child their name. She asked each child how they were feeling. She did not ask about the compound or about Marsh. She introduced herself and said that there were people outside who were going to take care of them today. Not one of the 9 children cried. That absence of reaction, noted in every agent's subsequent report, was, in some ways, the most disturbing detail of the morning. The main floor search produced the financial records crews had anticipated. In a locked filing cabinet in Marsh's personal office, the lock was cut. Investigators found 7 accordion folders, 1 per family. Each folder contained a signed intake agreement, a payment schedule, and a series of monthly progress reports sent to parents. The progress reports described educational activities, spiritual development milestones, and behavioral improvement metrics. They were formatted to look like official documentation. They contained no verifiable information, no teacher signatures, no curriculum identifiers, no academic assessments by licensed educators. They were fabricated. The accredited faith-based boarding program that 7 families had paid $3,800 per month to access did not exist in any formal sense. There was no accreditation. There was no licensed curriculum. There was no certified teacher. There was a man with no credentials, a farmhouse, and a filing system designed to make parents believe their money was going somewhere legitimate. Here's the take that will probably get us some friction. The parents in this case are not bystanders. 7 families, over 3 years, sent a combined $680,000 to a facility with no verifiable credentials, no public reviews, no licensed staff, and no enrollment documentation. How that level of trust was extended without verification is not a comfortable question. But it is the real question this case raises. Not just about Marsh, about the ecosystem that made Marsh possible. The children were transported to Texas Children's Hospital at 8:47 a.m. on February 27th. All 9 were examined by pediatricians and forensic nurses. The findings confirmed and expanded what Sandra Okafor had documented 6 weeks earlier. All 9 children showed evidence of linear bruising on their upper arms, consistent with repeated physical discipline using a rigid implement. 3 children showed healed rib injuries that had not received medical treatment. The youngest child, the 6-year-old, had not seen a licensed physician in 22 months. Not one child had access to a phone during their time at the facility. They were not permitted to contact their families directly. The progress reports that parents received were the only communication channel, and those communications ran entirely through Marsh. The 3 adults, Gerald Marsh, Patricia Foss, and Thomas Vale, were arrested at the property at 9:15 a.m. after the children had been transported and the initial search was complete. They were charged federally with child endangerment under 18 U.S.C. Section 2258, wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, and financial structuring under 31 U.S.C. Section 5324. Marsh was also charged separately with obstruction, stemming from the phone call to the Brower father in January that had attempted to redirect the family's cooperation with state investigators. All three were held without bail, pending a detention hearing scheduled for March 4th, 2026. What the search did not resolve, and what remained open in the weeks following, was the question of where the money went. $680,000 had moved through the church operating account over 3 years. ATF financial investigators traced $94,000 to Marsh's personal account through structured transfers. That left nearly $586,000 in expenditures through the operating account that required detailed reconciliation. Initial analysis suggested approximately $180,000 in legitimate operational expenses: property maintenance, utilities, food, vehicle costs. That left roughly $400,000 unaccounted for in a straightforward sense. Not necessarily hidden, but not clearly tracked either. The IRS was brought into the case formally on March 3rd, 2026, through a referral from ASLM's office. An IRS criminal investigation special agent was assigned to the financial component, reconstructing 3 years of financial activity from an organization that had never filed a Form 990 is, in practice, a long-form forensic accounting process. As of the time of filing, that reconstruction was ongoing. There is also a second thread that investigators have not publicly closed: Marsh's intake agreements. The documents found in the 7 accordion folders contained language suggesting that New Covenant Restoration Ministries had been operating in some form before its formal 2021 incorporation. References in the agreements to our established program and our track record with families in transition implied prior history. One intake document, referencing a family identified in court records only as Family G, bore a date of October 2020, 5 months before the nonprofit charter was filed. Where Marsh was operating before Crossroads, Farm Road, and whether there were children in other settings prior to 2021 was identified as a line of inquiry in the court filings. No additional properties or prior locations had been confirmed as of the most recent public court record. Would you have caught what Sandra Okafor caught? A bruise pattern on 4 children, remembered from a training she had attended 4 years earlier. Most people would have noted the bruises, referred it as a general concern. Sandra did not just refer it. She described the pattern with enough specificity and flagged the institutional nature of the home address with enough precision that a single intake coordinator at CPS understood immediately that this was not a standard home visit case. That chain of recognition, from a school nurse to a CPS intake worker to the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit, worked exactly as it was designed to work. The reporting system functioned. But it functioned because Sandra Okafor remembered one specific detail from a training seminar 4 years earlier and thought to include it. That is a very thin thread for 9 children's safety to hang on. The sentencing outcomes for Marsh, Foss, and Vale were pending as of the time this account was compiled. Under the wire fraud statute alone, each faces a maximum of 20 years per count. The child endangerment charges carry separate penalties. Federal sentencing guidelines, however, frequently produce outcomes that diverge significantly from statutory maximums. The plea negotiation process was ongoing. One detail stayed with me through the review of this case. In the financial records recovered from the property, investigators found a folder labeled Testimonials. Inside were printed emails from parents. Parents who had sent their children to New Covenant Restoration Ministries and had received back monthly progress reports and the occasional forwarded note. The emails were uniformly positive. Parents expressing gratitude. Parents describing how their children had improved. Parents saying they felt at peace, knowing their children were in a structured, faith-affirming environment. Those parents did not know what their money was funding. They did not know what was happening inside the farmhouse on Crossroads Farm Road. They had been given documentation that appeared official and communications that appeared personal, and they had made the reasonable human error of trusting the appearance of structure. Here is what this tells us about how these systems operate. The paperwork is the mechanism, not the building, not the fence, the paperwork. Marsh understood that parents who have made a difficult decision about their children need reassurance that the decision was right. He provided that reassurance systematically, month after month, at $3,800 per family. The documentation was the product. The children were incidental to it. Looking at this now, what would have happened if Sandra Okafor had not attended that training in 2022? If she had noted the bruises without the specific pattern recognition that let her name what she was seeing? If the CPS intake coordinator had routed the report through standard channels instead of flagging the institutional address? 9 children, invisible to every system designed to protect them, remained invisible because the systems were never triggered. Until one nurse remembered one detail. All 9 children were placed in emergency foster care following the February 27th operation. As of March 2026, the family reunification assessments for each child were in process. The legal framework for reunification is complex in cases where parents have, even unknowingly, contributed financially to a system of abuse. The parental rights question was before the Harris County Family Court as a separate proceeding from the criminal case. The network, as investigators understood it at the time of arrest, was 3 people and 1 property. That may be the complete picture. It may not be. The prior operation suggested by the pre-2021 intake document has not been publicly resolved. If Marsh operated elsewhere before Crossroads Farm Road, there may be children from an earlier cohort whose cases have never been formally identified. The demand that created New Covenant Restoration Ministries still exists. Parents in crisis looking for structured, values-aligned residential programs for difficult children. That demand is real. The licensing framework that should regulate who can respond to that demand has gaps. Texas's religious exemption for residential care facilities is not unique to Texas. Versions of it exist in multiple states. The legal architecture that let Marsh operate for 3 years without a single licensing inspection remains in place. Was this justice served? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every one. 1 nurse, 1 detail, 9 children found. The compound is closed. The exemption that made it possible is not. If you want to know about the financial investigation that is still open on this case, the $400,000 that has not been fully traced, subscribe. When the IRS criminal investigation findings become public, we will have the full breakdown.